journey with Elijah, a theme we'll come back to. And we continue the theme from the last several weeks of bread and feeding people. The alternate Old Testament reading for last week was about God providing manna in the wilderness. Our gospel today starts with a repeat of Jesus' words from last week's reading. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Since it's repeated this week, it must be really important. I find this especially interesting in relation to the Elijah story. The angel says, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." And what is Elijah's response to the food provided by the angel? The reading tells us he ate and drank, and he was able to do a 40-day journey on the strength of that God-provided sustenance. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry. Do you really believe Elijah ate and drank nothing else for 40 days and nights while hiking and mountain climbing? I certainly don't. As a doctor, I know the effects on the body of starvation and dehydration. We know Elijah lived to be taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire later, so he was obviously very special, but not that special. He was, after all, human, subject to the same laws of nature that we are. So the sustenance the angel gave him must have been more than just physical bread and water, the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall never be hungry. Is Jesus telling us we're failures as believers if we get hungry and thirsty and need a meal now and then? I think not. After all, Jesus fed the 5,000 real food, bread and fish, out of concern and compassion for their very human needs. And he knew the importance of physical sustenance and nutrition for us all. For all of us, including, and maybe especially, the least of us, the chronically hungry, the billions who lack basic food security. This is not to deny in any way the vital role that faith plays in sustaining us from day to day, but it's pretty easy for those of us who eat 3 square meals a day to get into the spiritual mode and take for granted the availability of food for our daily needs, food without which we can't survive. It can lead us to devalue the gift that nutrition is, and the need to care for the earth from which the gift comes. I'm afraid too many Christians think only of the spiritual food and drink Christ spoke of in the gospel today, and don't connect it with Jesus feeding the hungry people in front of him with real, tangible food. Food that fills the stomach, as the food the angel produced filled Elijah in preparation for his journey. After all, how can anyone fully attend to spiritual needs when he lacks basic nutrition? Food for the journey. The angel of the Lord touched him and said, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." The journey is one of the most ancient themes in religion and literature. From the Gilgamesh epic and the Bible to the Odyssey and Beowulf and Jack Kerouac, the journey has been both a literal description and a metaphor for learning and spiritual growth. Elijah's journey, which we have picked up partway through, started as a journey away from Jezebel's wrath and her death threats after Elijah killed her prophets devoted to Baal, or however you pronounce it. Elijah is disheartened and sounds clinically depressed. Let me die now. But after being fortified with the angel's physical and spiritual food for his 40-day journey, he meets God, not in the terrifying hurricane that hurls rocks off the mountain, nor the earthquake or firestorm that follow, but in a still, small voice instructing him for his next journey. So even a journey away can end up being a journey to God. In myth and legend, the hero's journey is fraught with hazard. There are obstacles to overcome, and it's in overcoming these obstacles that character is formed. Some journeys are specifically spiritual. Think of a pilgrimage to a special spiritual place. Lourdes or Iona, or the Camino de Santiago come to mind. Or a vision quest to discover one's unique spiritual connection and task in life. Others are voyages of discovery without a specific spiritual component. The European explorers, from Marco Polo to Magellan, searched for the wealth of far-off lands and remade the flat map into a globe. The sabbatical, coming from the word Sabbath, doesn't always involve a physical journey, but spiritually it's a time for rest, refreshment of body and mind, and reconnection with God. Here at Spirit of the Wilderness, we've been living with the journey theme as we've been getting ready for Mary Ellen's sabbatical. Now, as many of you know, a journey with Mary Ellen is always an adventure. I'm sure her sabbatical will be too, because her famous, though certainly not last words, are, let's see what's around that bend, over that hill, beyond that little porch. Beware this vision. We've been preparing to make a spiritual journey in parallel with Mary Ellen, carrying Spirit of the Wilderness together as we grow in responsibility for the well-being of the church and each other, as we learn to make the bread for the journey. Well, as a wise person once said, life is what happens while you're making other plans. Moses and the Israelites wandered in the desert 40 years before reaching their destination. Jonah spent some quality time with a whale before he escaped to Nineveh. Mary Ellen's son Stephen's journey changed direction radically a few weeks ago, and Mary Ellen's sabbatical journey took a detour just as she was preparing to leave. Sometimes on a journey we're thrown a curveball, and things happen that weren't in our plans. They're not sent by God to test us, as we are often told in an attempt to explain them. God, who deeply loves us, doesn't sit on high saying, think it's time for a trial now. Let's see. What plague shall I send? In giving us free will and allowing nature to follow laws that we have learned over millennia, God chose to give us the option of give up the option of being all-powerful. So it isn't God's wrath or capriciousness or malicious curiosity to find out how we'll react. For Mary Ellen, this was one of those stuff happens events that stops you in your tracks. And it's time for each of us to be God's hands and arms and feet, surrounding the whole Ashcroft and Spirit of the Wilderness family with love and support and baking bread for the journey. The psalmist says, "Out of the depths have I called to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits for him. In his word is my hope." And the word comes, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." For Mary Ellen, eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you. Words for the journey, words for us all.